There was a man whose name no one remembers. No one ever told the story of his life. No student ever mentioned him. No one ever stood at his grave and said, "This was a righteous man, a man who lived an honorable life." If history were written only by human beings, he would not exist in any of its pages. No mark, no legacy, not a single recorded line. But there is one place where his name was not forgotten. And on a day when every name would become meaningless, that unknown man became the center of a story that, if you truly understand it, will make you never look at your life the same way again. He was not the best of people. He was not the most devout. He was not the kind of person you would expect to be saved. He was the kind of person who, if you saw him in everyday life, would not leave any impression on you. A believer, but not strong enough to stay firm all the time. A man who prayed, but not always on time. A man who knew what was right, but did not always follow it. And worst of all, he was the kind of person who kept telling himself something that maybe you have also told yourself many times. Later. Later I will fix it. Later I will come back. Later I will become serious. He did not deny Allah. He did not claim that sin was right. He did not mock the truth. But he kept delaying, again and again. Every time his conscience spoke, he listened, then turned away. Every time a reminder came, he understood, then ignored it. Not because he hated the truth, but because he thought he still had time. And that thought almost destroyed him. You need to understand this. The most dangerous person is not the one who openly fights against Allah. The most dangerous person is the one who still believes, but keeps putting repentance off until later. Not because he is evil, but because he is careless. And if you are still listening, are you sure you are not like him? How many times have you said, "Tomorrow I will change"? How many times have you felt guilty, then comforted yourself by saying you still had another chance? How many times have you known exactly what was right, and still chosen what was easier? This story is not about a stranger. It is the story of a version of you, if you keep living the way you are living now. And what makes this story so frightening is not that he was terribly evil. It is that he was terribly ordinary. He did not commit some monstrous sin that made people recoil in horror. He was not a symbol of evil. He was simply weak. A man easily pulled by his emotions. A man who made compromises with himself. A man who always thought he would come back, just not yet. No one is afraid of becoming some great criminal, but many people are slowly becoming him. And the most frightening part is what? That you do not realize it until everything is over. But stop for a moment. Do not assume this is only a story meant to frighten you. Because if you listen all the way to the end, you will discover something even more astonishing than fear. Because this very man, the man you may see yourself in, became the last man to enter Jannah. Not because he deserved it, not because he was exceptional, but because there was something in his heart that never died. If you stay, if you listen carefully, this story will not only frighten you, it will make you rethink the way you understand Allah, sin, forgiveness, and the very chance you still have right now. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where we do not just tell stories, but dig into truths that can change the way you see your life and your faith. If content like this speaks to you, subscribe to the channel and support us, so we can keep bringing you stories that are not only meant to be heard, but meant to wake you up. And now, let us return to that man. A man who, if you met him in ordinary life, you would never imagine that his destiny would be tied to one of the greatest moments of mercy. A man who had nothing special about him, except for one thing. He never dared say that Allah was not worthy of obedience. He could be weak. He could be wrong. He could delay. But deep inside, he still knew where the truth was. And every time he fell, he never called wrong right. He never made sin normal. He only slowed down. And sometimes, in the eyes of people, slowing down does not seem like a big deal. But on a journey where every breath could be your last, slowing down can become the distance between being saved and losing everything. That is why this story begins not with light, but with a warning. Because if you see yourself in Him, then the question is not whether you are wrong. The question is, how long will you keep delaying? He is no longer the man you once imagined. No face, no recognizable form, no trace of anything that would make others say this was once a human being. All that remains is something burned beyond recognition, not fully alive, yet not allowed to disappear, not truly existing, yet unable to end. The fire did not only burn his body, it shattered everything he once believed about himself. In this world, people can comfort themselves. They can tell themselves, I am not that bad. I am still better than many others. I still have time. But in that place, there is no comparison, no other people, no room left for illusion, only truth. Every sin is no longer a memory. It becomes an experience, not something seen, but something felt, not something heard about, but something lived inside. Every time he once ignored a reminder, every time he once delayed apologizing to Allah, those were no longer small things. They became flames with shape, with weight, with pain that no language in this world can describe. And the worst part was not the pain. It was the clarity. He no longer argued with himself, no longer excused himself, no longer gave reasons, no longer hid behind circumstance. Everything he once used to quiet his conscience vanished completely. In that place, you cannot lie. Not because you are forbidden from lying, but because you no longer believe your own lies. Have you ever known you were wrong, yet still tried to tell yourself it was not that serious? In that place, that moment is stripped bare, and you realize that you always knew. You simply chose not to face it. The fire did not only burn his body, it burned away every layer that had hidden him from himself. And what remained was one thing only: the naked truth of the person he had been. And in that truth, there was nothing to be proud of, nothing to hold on to, nothing to hope for. Time did not move there the way you understand it. There was no day and no night, no beginning and no end, only repetition. Repetition of pain, repetition of awareness, repetition of realizing what every choice he once called unimportant had actually become. Have you ever thought a small thing would not matter? A small lie? A small delay? A choice you told yourself was just this once? In that place, all those small things came together into one reality that could not be escaped. And when a human being is pushed that far, he no longer dreams about reward. He only dreams about the end. Not Jannah, not joy, not happiness. Only for it to stop, only to get out, only not to burn anymore. And then something happened that he never would have dared imagine. Not because he deserved it, not because he had suffered enough, but because a command was given that stood above every rule he had ever understood. He was pulled out of that place, not walking out on his own, not escaping by his own effort, not saved through his own strength. He was pulled out like something that no longer had power to resist, no will, no ability to choose anything for itself. And even that moment brought him no joy, because he did not believe it. When you have lived in pain for long enough, you begin to suspect even relief. When you have become used to punishment, you no longer trust rescue. He did not think this was salvation. He thought it was only another kind of punishment. Maybe a pause, maybe a transition, maybe something even worse. Because inside his mind, there was no room left for hope. Only fear. Not the fear of someone who does not know, but the fear of someone who knows too much. He did not lift his head. He did not look around. He did not ask what was happening, because he did not dare. When there is a kind of fear that, once it reaches you, makes you stop wanting to know what comes next. You only want one thing. Do not send me back to what came before. And in everything he could have wished for at that moment, he did not think of Jannah. He did not think of forgiveness. He did not think of reward. He had only one plea left, silent, trembling, hardly even daring to become words. Do not send me back there. That was all. After everything he had gone through, his ambition had been reduced to that. Not because he did not want more, but because he no longer believed he deserved more. That is what hell had done to him. It had not only caused pain, it had convinced him that he no longer had the right to hope. And in that state, something was about to happen that he could not understand at all, because he thought everything was over. But in reality, everything was only just beginning. He stood there, but not truly standing. No full sense of body, no clear awareness of place, only a thin thread of consciousness trying to hold on to existence. After everything he had just gone through, he no longer saw reality the way a man sees it. He saw everything like someone dragged back from the edge of an abyss, still convinced that he would be thrown back into it at any moment. There was no one beside him to reassure him. No sign telling him that he was safe. Only a silence so heavy that it frightened him more than the fire had. Then the question came. Not in sound the way human beings hear sound, but clearer than any words he had ever heard. What do you want? If you place yourself in that position, you may think the answer would be obvious. You may think he would ask for forgiveness, ask for Jannah, ask for peace. But that is only if you have not lived through what he had lived through. When a human being is pushed to the very edge of pain, he no longer thinks in big terms. He thinks only of survival. And even when opportunity appears, he still does not dare believe it is opportunity. He did not answer immediately, not because he did not know what he wanted, but because he did not dare want it. There is a strange truth about human beings. When they grow used to being punished, they begin to fear kindness itself. They become suspicious of goodness. They shrink their own desires in order to protect themselves from disappointment. And that is exactly what he did. In his heart, there was something far greater than what he was about to say. A desire so large that, if spoken aloud, it would mean everything. But he would not touch it. He would not even allow himself to think it. Because if hope rose too high, the fear of losing it would be even worse. So he chose the safer path. He chose to become smaller. And with all the trembling of a soul that had been worn down, he said, "My Lord, only do not send me back there." Not asking for reward, not asking to be brought closer to light, not asking to be saved completely, only not to return. A request so small that if you heard it from the outside, you might think it was obvious. But for him, it was the most he dared hope for. And the strange thing is that he believed his request made sense. He believed asking for more would be too much. He believed mercy had limits. He believed he had already used up all his chances. That is what fear had done to the way he saw everything. It was not that Allah had become less. It was that he was now seeing Allah through a heart that had been made small. Have you ever felt unworthy to ask for something? Not because you did not want it, but because you believed you had no right. He was in exactly that state, but at its deepest level. And then what happened did not follow what he expected. There was no cold silence, no rejection, no reminder of his sins, only acceptance. What he asked for was granted. And in that moment, he felt something he had forgotten long ago. Relief. But that relief created a new problem. When pain begins to ease, the heart begins to function again. When fear no longer crushes you completely, the buried desires begin to rise. He did not want to think about it. He tried to keep himself at the level of enough. He kept telling himself, "This is enough. This is already too much." But the light in the distance would not leave him alone. Not a blinding light, not something that made him afraid, but something gentle. Something that pulled him. Something that, if you have ever suffered, you would recognize immediately. Peace. He saw it. Only a little. And at once he turned away. Because in his mind, one rule had become permanent. Do not look at what you can never have. But the more he tried not to look, the more he became aware of it. The more he tried not to want it, the more he felt what he was lacking. And then an inner struggle began. One side said, "Do not ask again. You have already asked too much." Another whispered, "But what if it is possible?" One side said, "You do not deserve it." Another whispered, "But what if he gives it?" This was no longer a struggle between good and evil. It was a struggle between fear and hope. And the astonishing part was that hope began to win. Not because he became brave, but because he began to realize something he had never understood before. What he had received was not based on what he deserved. So maybe he had misunderstood everything from the beginning. Maybe the limit was not in mercy. Maybe the limit had been in the way he saw it. And for the first time, he dared to think about asking for more. Not because he was confident, but because he had begun to doubt his own fear. And that would change everything that came next. Then the thing he once thought impossible began to happen. He asked, not for much, not for something grand, just a little more, a little farther from the place he feared most, a little more distance, enough to feel safer. And inside himself, he had already prepared one thought. This is the limit. This is where it ends. After this, surely there can be nothing more. But what happened did not resemble any rule he had ever known. There was no hesitation, no reminder that he had already asked too much, no warning that he was going beyond his place, only acceptance once again. And when he was brought farther away, when safety became more real to him, he entered a very strange state. Not fear like before, not pain like before, but confusion, deep confusion, because the world as he had understood it no longer made sense. In this world, everything has limits. You ask once, and someone may give. Ask twice, and people begin to grow tired. Ask a third time, and then you become a burden. Every relationship has a point where patience runs out. He had lived his whole life by that rule, and he carried it with him into the next world. But there, that rule did not exist. Every time he thought he had gone too far, he was given more. Every time he told himself this must be the last time, another door opened. Not because he had persuaded anyone, not because he deserved it, but because there was something he still had not understood. He began to realize a truth that frightened him more than the fire had. Maybe he had misunderstood Allah his entire life. Not misunderstood in the sense of denying him, but misunderstood the scale of his mercy. He had always thought mercy was something that had to be earned, something conditional, something limited, something balanced against wrongdoing. But what was happening before him obeyed none of those ideas. It did not measure. It did not compare. It did not stop. And that frightened him in a completely different way. No longer the fear of punishment, but the fear that he had understood everything incorrectly. Then he saw it. No longer a faint, distant light, but a clear reality. A place with no cries, no tension, no memory of pain. A place that, by merely looking at it, made something deep within him tremble. But instead of running toward it, he stopped. Because this time, his fear was no longer about hell. It was about hope itself. He thought, "This cannot be for me." You need to understand this. There is a kind of injury that does not come only from pain, but from believing that you are no longer worthy of anything good. And once that belief sinks deep enough, that you begin to doubt every good thing that comes toward you. He was in exactly that state. He did not think this was reward. He thought it was a test, a way of exposing him, a way of letting him see something he could never actually have. And that was the moment when he said something no one would have expected. Not thanks, not another request, but a question, trembling, almost desperate. "My Lord, are you mocking me?" That was not disrespect. That was the naked truth of a soul wounded too deeply. He could not believe that what was happening was real. He could not believe that mercy could reach this far. He thought there had to be something hidden behind all of this. One final blow, one final reversal. Because that is how worldly life works. But the answer he received was unlike anything he had ever known. There was no anger, no blame, and no rebuke. Only a gentle confirmation, enough to break apart the entire world as he had known it. There was no mockery, no deception, no trap here. What he was seeing was real. What he was receiving was real. What was waiting ahead of him was also real. And in that moment, something happened to him that no fire had ever been able to do. He broke. Not his body, but the false belief he had carried his entire life. The belief that mercy had limits. The belief that he had to deserve it before receiving it. The belief that his past would always define his future. All of it collapsed. And for the first time, he began to understand. Not with theory, but through experience. That mercy is not a reaction. It does not appear only after you have done enough. It is not activated by achievement. It exists because the one who gives it is like that. And in standing before that reality, he no longer knew what to think, because everything he had believed was no longer true. And that was the moment when he began to step into something he had never dared believe he would touch. Then he stepped through, not with confidence, not with the posture of a man who had won, but slowly, carefully, as though every step could still be taken back from him. He did not run toward the gate. He did not rush into the light. He entered like a man who still did not believe he had permission to be there. Because the hardest thing to believe is not that punishment can end. It is that you can be accepted. There are pains that end when you leave them behind. But there are wounds that remain even after you are safe. And his wound was no longer the fear of punishment. It was the fear that all of this goodness could still disappear. He looked around. No screaming, no tension, no memory of pressure. Everything was so gentle that he did not know how to respond. There was nothing to fight, nothing to guard against, nothing to avoid. And that peace itself confused him, because he had grown used to waiting for the next terrible thing to happen. So he stood there, afraid to move deeper, afraid to touch anything. Not because he did not want to, but because he did not believe he had the right. Inside his mind, one old logic still remained. Good things are always conditional. Joy is always temporary. After being given something, sooner or later, it is taken back. But there was no sign of any of that. No one reminded him of his past. No one looked at him as a man who had once failed. No one told him that he was only there temporarily. Only one truth was beginning to reveal itself, though he still did not dare accept it. He was allowed to remain, not as a trial, not on borrowed time, but as someone who belonged there. Then came the words, not long, not complicated, but enough to make everything he thought he understood collapse yet again. What he was being given was not only this place. It was more, not a little more, but more beyond anything he had words for. Not a reward that matched what he had done, not the result of his own effort, but a gift beyond all proportion. He tried to understand it, tried to compare it, tried to place it inside some familiar logic, but he could not, because everything he had ever known about fairness no longer applied there. He had spent his life believing everything had to balance. If you did much, you got much. If you did little, you got little. If you sinned much, you were punished much. That is how the world works. But what he was receiving now had none of that kind of balance. It was not based on what he had done. It did not reflect his past. It was not the result of any calculation. And that made him afraid again, though in a different way. Not fear of losing it, but fear that he still did not understand. He did not know how to respond. And in that confusion, a question escaped him. Not because he wanted to doubt, but because he had no other way to make sense of it. Is this real? That was not the question of someone ignorant. It was the question of someone who had seen so much pain that he no longer knew how to believe in goodness. And the answer he received was not a long explanation, not a sermon, and only a simple confirmation, enough to silence every last doubt. There was no mockery, no test, no misunderstanding. What he was receiving was real. And in that moment, one final thing inside him let go. Not his body, not fear, but doubt. The doubt that mercy could still be taken back. The doubt that he would be judged again and sent away. The doubt that his past was still chasing him. All of it vanished. And for the first time, he understood something he had never understood in his whole life. That what he was being given was not because he deserved it. It was because the one giving it is not limited by the way human beings think. That mercy does not come only after you become good enough. It comes even when you have nothing left with which to defend yourself. And when he looked back at everything that had happened, he realized something that filled him with both fear and gratitude. All his sins, all his delays, all those times he had said later, none of them had ever become greater than what he was receiving now. Not because they were small, but because mercy was greater. But do not misunderstand this. This is not a story meant to reassure you that everything will work out in the end no matter what. This is a story meant to make you realize that he almost lost everything for one reason only: delay. Not because he did not believe, not because he did not know, but because he thought he still had time. And that is the point where this story turns back towards you. You are not where he was. You have not yet gone through what he went through. You still have the chance to return before everything becomes clear in the way no one ever wants it to become clear. You still have the ability to turn back while turning back still matters. And if there is one thing this story is trying to tell you, it is not. You can still be forgiven. It is this: do not wait until you are forced to understand before you begin to return. Because by then, you may finally understand. But it may already be too late. The lesson here is not, you can keep sinning and eventually you will still be forgiven. No. The real lesson is this. Do not gamble your entire life away just because of the habit of delaying your return to Allah. Because you do not know whether your later will even exist. So what can you do right now? You do not need to change your entire life in one day. But you can begin with one very honest step. Stop delaying. If you know something is right, do it now. If you know something is wrong, stop now. If there is still even a small sense of guilt in your heart, a small fear when you hear about jahannam, a small hope when you hear about Jannah, then that is not your weakness. That is the call. Do not extinguish it. Turn it into action before you are forced to understand everything in the way no one wants to understand it. If stories like this make you reflect, if you want to understand your faith more deeply, understand the history of the prophets more deeply, and learn lessons that can change the way you live every day, then join the Prophetic History Explained community for more beneficial and meaningful knowledge. And do not forget to subscribe and support us so we can continue bringing you deep and honest content that can reach your heart in the moments you need it most.